paddy wagon has stopped. Outside, the metallic clatter of closing gates, the commands of cops, and the barking of dogs could be heard. With a clank, the lock on the paddy wagon's door was opened, and the cops swung the door open.
Form in a single file. Hands behind your back. Faster, faster. Single file. Move, move.
One by one, we started jumping out of the van. Although the column of convicts had only a few meters to cross to reach the nearest entrance, there were 2 rows of cops with furious barking shepherds on either side of the path. One of the dogs to my right was straining at the leash, and the escort deliberately let her loose so that the angry, gaping jaws of the dog were just centimeters away from the passing detainees. Entering through the wide door, an intense and unmistakable smell of the prison hits the senses. This odor is a complex combination and an unmatched spectrum of sweat, dirt, and filth, with a hint of the aroma of rotten food, strongly tinged with decay, along with a lilac bouquet of fear and pressure peculiar only to a prison. Why lilac, I'm at a loss to say, but if I were asked to paint the smell of a pre-trial detention prison, be it in Penza, Kaliningrad, or Yekaterinburg, lilac shades would definitely predominate. Nevertheless, I'm not an expert in this matter and would leave it to a more professional judgment of Paco Rabanne, Chanel, or Guerlain if they ever decide to study this unique gamut, although I have some doubts that it will ever happen. We were herded into a room where they made us pass through something resembling a railroad ticket counter, where we had to provide our article, name, surname, and year of birth while they collected any valuable items, if there were any. It remains somewhat unclear what valuable items someone coming from a temporal detention center might have. One could also declare himself a sexual minority if he belonged to that group, after which he would be assigned to a place in the local rooster coop, which is a cell where non-traditional orientation individuals were held. This was undoubtedly a sign of modern trends, unprecedented progress, and the triumph of Western democracy, while homosexuality was a criminal offense in the Soviet Union, whereas here, the pretrial detention prison lovingly and attentively offered such a service to the mentioned category. Nobody from our group applied for that special service. After the registration, we quickly moved through and got all herded into a large, brightly lit room covered with white tiles that hadn't been cleaned for a long time and were covered with dirt. There were 2 rows of long tables on both sides. Here they could take a closer look at us, the newcomers, and understand who's who. The majority were middle-aged men with bodies and arms covered in tattoos that clearly indicated their previous experience with such establishments. They in the know quickly followed the established rules, setting the rhythm and direction for the rest. They moved toward the tables, with the cops staying on the opposite side. A couple of homeless-looking tramps and one older gentleman also joined our group. I remember wondering why they'd arrested such a respectably-looking man, but in a pre-trial detention jail, it's advised to keep all questions to yourself, just as it's not customary to stick your nose into someone else's business. Besides, the atmosphere wasn't quite suitable for such interviews. In this room, we were made to undress, tossing our clothes onto a table, where a group of cops on the opposite side checked pockets, hat folds, seams, jacket linings, and probed shoes. To undress meant not just taking off your outer clothing for the subsequent entrance to the ballroom. It meant stripping down completely, where a special cop designated for challenging and responsible work first made a detainee bend down, then spread his buttocks, and carefully examined inside to prevent the smuggling of illegal items. Needless to say, the job was not for everyone. It was important and required special skills and a high level of professionalism. All of this was done quickly and briskly, under the continuous shouting of the wardens, and sometimes with the stimulating thwack of a rubber baton on the back. The cops clearly knew their business and efficiently processed the entire crowd like the parts on an assembly line. On the tables, there was the hustle and bustle as items were examined, pulled apart, sometimes torn or cut to check linings, and tossed into one large pile from which each detainee had to quickly retrieve his jacket, underwear mixed with hats, or socks inside them. The next stage in the same room involved a couple of barbers enlisted from among the inmates who were serving their time in this jail instead of going to the labor camp. Each of them, armed with a dull old hair clipper, shaved his customer completely bald. Shaving is said with a degree of confidence and grandeur because the clippers were so old and blunt that they tended to pluck the hair more than cutting it. However, the process proceeded like an assembly line at a Ford factory without glitches, delays, or hesitation. No one paid attention to the cries and protests of those being shaved, and if anyone got too agitated, the nearby cop was quick to explain the manner of behavior that the agitated citizens should adhere to with a blow of his rubber baton or gloved fist. After dressing and haircutting, our group was sent to the bath, a large room with several old and rusty showers pouring water. After the cold cells of the detention center and a recent journey in the freezing police van, the rush of hot water felt like the epitome of bliss. On the wooden benches attached to the perimeter, already darkened by time and covered in soap fat and filth, lay miserable pieces of old soap with which we were expected to wash. Time was not abundant, and soon another cop appeared at the door, yelling the end of the washing process and the transition to the next stage. There were no towels or clothes or anything to wipe out water. One can use his ingenuity to figure out what to use for this purpose, or not to use anything. Hastily dressing, carrying our bags with our meager possessions, we were lined up in the corridor, led out of the bath, and assigned to different buildings and cells. A cop quickly came up and led his client to the corner where they had to wait. Eventually my turn came. Familiar orders followed, and the escorting cop guided me through the corridors and passageways to a place where I would venture to explore a new life from the heights of philosophical tenets. It's doubtful that after my not-so-long journey, I could find an exit. In general, it seemed to me that the prison consisted entirely of a multitude of turns, twists, corridors, and intermediate grids, separating and dividing various blocks and corridors. It didn't take long, but oh, the emotions you experience at that moment. For someone in search of intense experiences, loving roller coasters, skydiving, bungee jumping, or wingsuit flying, I would highly recommend being escorted to prison under an article with an indefinite sentence. A genuine good prison with lineage and history where only the sight of its walls alone already weighs on you, down to your very core. This should be processed with the right escort, when you will also feel a fiery kiss in the form of a hit by a police baton on your back or between your ribs as a lasting memory of your fleeting encounter. I promise you unforgettable sensations. While being led, you go through a rich spectrum of feelings before meeting the unknown, a wide and varied range of fears. However, you can only experience this once. The second or subsequent time, you won't feel anything similar. The second time simply would not work. After all, everything is already known, and there would be not much diversity. It's tough to find diversity there. It's a paradox. It's like a chance that comes only once, and the second time, it won't be possible to experience anything similar. Later, recalling those happy moments, I tried to find an analogy to what I had gone through. I searched and thought and eventually found one. Strangely enough, you feel something similar when you come to take an exam. An important, possibly decisive exam, and you don't feel entirely prepared for it. It's terrifying. Your hands start shaking, and even your legs aren't as steady as usual. What a calamity. Your voice falters and begins to tremble. But once you enter the examination room, you take your ticket and read the questions, even if they're exactly the ones you least wanted or expected. Then, the fear disappears. That's it. The fear is gone. Now you're full of strength, and everything is subject to a single thought: how to get out of this predicament, recall something already forgotten, figure something out, and present it in a somewhat acceptable form. Here, everything is geared towards the fight, and there's no turning back. Only forward, one way or another, as long as you get the coveted score. And I went through something similar at that moment when I entered an unknown, incomprehensible, and terrifying world. It was the uncertainty that was truly frightening. Finally, we entered a corridor with rows of cells stretching along one side. The wing to which I was being led was known as the White Wing. This term has nothing to do with racism or the conditions inside. White simply means that it's where individuals from law enforcement agencies, specifically police, military personnel, and very rarely people from the Federal Security Service, FSB, are held during the investigation, trial, and until they get sentenced after subsequent court hearings. In the Black Wings, you could find everybody else. All the inmates were further divided into newcomers, or gingerbread, as they are often called, and recidivists, what does not require an explanation. In the prison, they were contained together. There was also a section for juveniles and cells for the most heinous criminals, special VIP individuals, and similar types of prisoners. The building with the cells to which I was led to had multiple floors, but we didn't go up, and I was stopped somewhere in the middle. The massive doors were distinct from those in the detention center, equipped with various bolts, locks, a large peephole, and a food slot. The manger doors were covered with so many layers of paint that they had started to peel off in thick layers. All the protrusions, hinges, latches, and who knows what else from this diabolical design presented themselves as if they were melted with rounded forms, where beneath the peeling greenish-gray paint, you could see other ancient layers of paint that could be studied to learn the history of the wing. With a clamor and a bang, the door swung open wide, but the command to the cell did not follow. The guard jingled the keys to the grill behind the door. The grill, which had a rather amusing name in prison slang, was called a robot. Why and by whom such a humorous idea came to mind, I never found out, although I did hear an amusing anecdote in the cell about a naive foreigner convict who tried out to find the reason. Apparently, the same tormenting question befell the inmates who were sitting there.
To the cell!
A sharp command barked behind my back. I entered. Before me there were about 14 or 15 people. There were more people than banks. All eyes turned to me. It was at that very moment that all fear and tension instantly evaporated. The exam ticket had been taken, and now it was time to answer it. And how to answer it? Well, that depended on me and the situation. The examination board that stood before me only remotely resembled one. But in essence, that's what it was. Part of the board sat on bunk beds, while the other part was on the same bunks but in a horizontal position, examining me with interest.
Well, come on in. Now that you're in,
said the fattest of them all, seated on a short bench in front of a small table by the wall. Hang on your Macintosh in that corner. He nodded towards a corner with an old sheet dangled behind which jackets, coats, and other clothes were hanging side by side. Take a seat. I sat down on an improvised low stool made of various rags wrapped around either a box or crate.
well, tell us who you are and how you ended up here.
I took off my jacket and sat down on the stool next to another small table, skillfully improvised from a box, and surveyed the cell. The cell appeared significantly smaller than the one in the temporal detention center, measuring approximately 3 by 5 meters. Right across from the door and the robot were bunk beds. The bunk beds were solid and consisted of wooden planks stacked in 2 tiers from wall to wall. They were covered with various sheets, blankets, rags, and jackets. Both tiers were occupied by inmates, all of them staring at me. On the right side, there was a low stool on which I sat, next to a small table made, as I mentioned earlier, from a box. Behind it, and right next to the robot, was a corner filled with warm jackets and a pile of formless boots. On the other side of the cell, a few centimeters from the bunks, were a small kitchen table and a bench. Beyond it, there was a sink and a brick wall separating the latrine section with a squat toilet that was built into the floor. The entrance to the latrine section was covered with an old dirty sheet. Above the stool where I sat, under the ceiling, hung a small TV, which I later found out was never turned off. The walls were decorated with portraits of unknown artists depicting naked women in various poses. The walls were painted with the same undefined color as the corridor, and the ceiling, which apparently used to be white, now presented various shades of gray. As a precautionary measure, there were no pipes, hooks, or anything else to hang up yourself. Neither on the walls nor the ceiling, which was a matter of concern for one of the inmates who was repeatedly telling everybody the same story about his unjust detention to the annoyance of the entire board crowd. Sometime after, somebody offered him help to hang himself by